Welcome in to today's episode of the Dirty Jersey Show. I'm your host, Jordan Spurgeon, and today we'll be covering the softness and changes from around the world of sports. Now, don't get me wrong, I miss sports as much as the next person. However, there are some things in sports that we really don't agree with as we've seen this transition in sports becoming a little bit softer. One example that stands out to me is Shaun Wade being ejected in the Fiesta Bowl, an Ohio State defensive back. He's a senior, and then he gets ejected from the game. He's not even allowed to be on the sidelines. Ohio State loses, and that's his final collegiate game. I think that is wrong, but we'll get into that and more on today's episode of the Dirty Jersey Show. So first, we're going to send it off to our correspondent, Susan Wong, who has all the latest details in targeting calls and how they differ in high school and at the pro level. Susan, take it away.
It's Susan, and today we're talking about softness in sports, specifically in high school football. What I really want to focus on today is how the targeting rule is different at the high school level than it is at the college and the NFL level. And that's mainly because there is no instant replay in high school football. And everything is relied on what the official sees, what they call, what their perspective is on it. And there's a couple issues with this. First of all, it's an opinion or what they see, what they did see or what they did see. And then there's also new school and old school perspectives on these officials. So some of them might have learned the different rules differently, so they might view different actions differently. And in 2014, the NFHS, which is the National Federation of State High Schools Association, came up with this rule that if a player gets penalized for targeting, they're automatically ejected out of the game, and that's kind of unfair. There's no second chance. They immediately get ejected because of a targeting call that you can't prove right or wrong because there is no instant replay. It's just based on what they see. And a lot of times it's not very obvious, and they can either still get kicked out or the officials will have a hard time figuring out whether or not to kick this player out. But Texas in the 2019 season has adopted a new rule where they have reclassified the intent of harm in their targeting. So there's if there's an actual intent of harm and it's obvious, the officials can call that and automatically eject the player. Or if there is no intent of harm but they still note it as a targeting, then they can penalize. Then it can result in a 15-yard penalty. And I think this rule is actually something that should be implemented in other states as well, because it just allows more of an opportunity, and it just makes it less soft, brings the action back, because if you just kick them out, there's no chance for them to learn from that, because it's just yeah. Anyways, so that's all I have. It's Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Great stuff as always. Now we're going to send it over to Kayla O'Sullivan, who's got some mentality changes and softness in baseball. So Kayla, please explain to us how baseball has become softer in recent years.
Unlike football and basketball, baseball just isn't a contact sport. They're not getting hit like the other guys. They're not getting bumped around. And the only bad calls they have to complain about is a strike below the knees or a ball that's right down the middle. But they're still soft because of the way they act, the way their attitude comes into play, sometimes way too much. Trevor Bauer would be a great example of that, because when he was getting taken out for pitching terribly in a game, instead of just giving the coach the baseball and walking off the field angry, you can walk into the clubhouse, it's okay. Instead, he threw the ball from the pitcher's mound all the way over the center field wall. There's other great examples of that. Not exactly, but pitchers coming out, punching water coolers, throwing ice packs and coolers onto the ground, throwing the buckets of gum. And yeah, sometimes teams try to make fun out of it, but sometimes it's a little too much.
Thank you, Kayla. And finally, for the last segment of today's episode of the Dirty Jersey Show, we're going to send it on over to Will Margulis, last but not least, so we can talk about the differences in the NBA we've seen and how the game has changed and maybe become more soft since 2010.
In the 90s and 2000s, basketball came to be what we see it as today, except the physicality was ramped up. The game had a nice balance of inside and outside players, and different physical techniques like hand checking were still allowed. In the 2010s, the rules and play style of the NBA changed to focus more on the outside game. And you could say, well, that seems like a natural progression. What's so soft about that? Well, let's compare some videos of post-ups from the mid-2000s and post-ups from 2019. The first video we'll be looking at is footage from a Nuggets-Lakers game in around 2007. Here we can see Kobe and Melo going at it in the low, mid, and high post. They're using a lot of body contact, they're using their elbows, they're really getting up in each other's spaces. You can see Melo at one point uses his thigh to space Kobe off of him with a jab step. It's really interesting stuff. You'll also notice that, while intense and physical, none of it is necessarily a foul, and the refs call it as such. No fouls were called on these plays. Now, let's take a look at one of the most post-centric players we still have in the NBA today, DeAndre Ayton. As we can see from DeAndre's film, it's just plain and simple. There's much less physicality in the game. Now, compared to the last video, a lot of these post-ups are him with the ball, rather than him without. When you have the ball on a post-up, it's more likely that the refs are going to be looking at you, so it's more likely that they'll call fouls if they see anything. However, off the ball, Ayton is getting less resistance, even from players his size, than Kobe and Melo were getting from each other. Personally, I would love to see another battle like the one Kobe and Melo gave us 13 years ago. But in today's NBA, I don't think it's going to happen.
So that'll wrap up today's episode of the Dirty Jersey Show, live from home. So hope everybody out there loved the episode, and as always, I want to thank our contributors, Susan, Kayla, and Will, for everything they brought to the show. I'm your host, Jordan Spurgeon, signing off for one last time.